joining Creative Science for our live stream. We're about a year old now, and we've been covering marketing, sales, tech, and PR. And I'm really excited to bring you guys our fourth live stream. It seems like the more of these we do, it just becomes more and more exciting. We're talking to more and more people, and really kind of finding our groove on this, I think, or I'd like to say anyway. Um, anyway, I am the editor in chief, Luke Jones, and if you're watching this and you enjoy it, please give the video a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check us out on LinkedIn, and check out our website, creativescience.io. Over to you, Sam.
Cool. Thank you, Luke. So I am the deputy editor at Creative Science. I've been here for almost a year as well. Employee number one, so it's been a fun ride. I would say this is probably one of the more excited conversations I have in terms of the YouTube streams that we have every month when it comes to the topic, as well as our guest, Dr. Fou. We're going to be talking about ad fraud, and our guest today, we're joined by Dr. Augustine Fou, who is one of the more recognized voices in digital advertising when it comes to ad fraud, measurement, as well as transparency. Dr. Fou is the founder of Fou Analytics and has spent many years, I think you mentioned before the live stream, 15 years, helping brands, agencies, and publishers understand what's really happening behind the numbers in digital advertising. So his research has uncovered everything from bot traffic, and that number has really skyrocketed over the last couple of years just due to AI scrapers, as well as fake audiences, to broader issues around measurement, as well as accountability in the ad tech ecosystem. So today we're going to dive right in. And Dr. Fou, welcome to our monthly creativescience.io YouTube Live.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Luke. Glad to be here with you.
Yeah, let's dive right in. First, let's just start by defining ad fraud for those of our viewers who are less familiar with it. What is it? Why does it exist? And why is it perpetuated?
Sure. Well, ad fraud is a uniquely digital thing, right? So basically, the way digital advertising is supposed to work is when a person visits a website, when the web page loads, there's going to be a number of ads that load on the page. So typically that inventory doesn't exist before the visit, right? So what bad guys are doing now is they have the ability to set up thousands and thousands of fake websites using something like a WordPress template, right? So they can just repeat it many, many times. And they would use bot traffic to load the page to cause the ads to load. So the reason we call that fraud is because the advertisers are expecting to get their ads in front of people, humans, right, when they visit web pages. But now the bad guys are just automating this mechanism of creating websites, loading the pages with bot traffic, which are basic software programs, and then generating those ad impressions out of thin air. So the advertiser is not getting what they paid for, and that's why we call it fraud, and it's fraud in digital advertising. And because it's all digital bits and bytes, it's extremely easy to scale. I mean, people who have been around advertising for years might remember sometimes the print magazines. They would print extra copies that no one really subscribed to or paid for, and they may end up throwing that in the river. But it's much harder to print up thousands of copies of paper newspapers or print magazines. It's way easier to just set up websites from the comfort of your computer chair.
So that's really interesting. And I'd like to learn more about what really motivates ad fraud. Do you think a lot of it's on purpose? Do you think a lot of it is completely just accidental, just part of the system? How do we drill into that a little bit more?
There's no accidental ad fraud. It is all on purpose, and the sole purpose is to make as much money as possible as fast as possible. So if you were a fraudster, if you were a would-be criminal, think about it this way. Is it easier to go get a gun, put on a mask and like walk down to your local bank and try to rob it? Or is it easier to sit in your computer chair in front of your computer in your pajamas and set up 10,000 fake WordPress sites and start running ads, right? Probably the latter. And so bad guys have made a very simple choice. It is so super easy to set up digital things, right? Fake websites. If you just Google buy traffic for my website, it's basically the same as buy views for my YouTube channel, or buy likes for my Facebook page, or buy followers for my Instagram page. All of that is automated by bots and fraudulent activity. So when you have this entire ecosystem ready to support you, it is way easier for criminals, even script kiddies, right? Inexperienced coders, they don't even need any experience programming. They can set up lots and lots of websites and start making money through digital advertising. That's been the gaping hole for the last 15 years. And that's why there's billions of dollars lost to ad fraud, even though big advertisers don't acknowledge it, don't admit it, and don't want to talk about it. That's why we're talking about it today.
Thank you for that. What part of the tech supply chain tends to create the biggest opportunities for fraud, and which channels do you have your eye on?
It's what we would call programmatic, right? So programmatic is kind of like the automated buying and selling of digital ads. So that was roughly 15 years ago when it all started. Prior to that, advertisers would literally sit across the table from Condé Nast, Meredith, real publisher, and negotiate deals with them to either place ads in their magazines or place ads on their corresponding websites. That's great. Those publishers are not there to rip off the advertisers. However, when we started buying digital media through ad exchanges, right? So roughly 2012, 2013 is when it really became mainstream. That's when the entire Pandora's box of fraud got opened. Okay. So once the ad exchanges came along, and the very first one was AppNexus, they allowed anyone to onboard their inventory, and the advertisers would be able to just buy that inventory, right? So previously, when an advertiser bought ads from ESPN, the ads would go on ESPN.com. Now, when they're buying ads from the ad exchange, they don't know ahead of time where the ads are going, right? It goes to an auction process, very similar to the stock market, and you bid on every single ad opportunity, and then the ad ends up somewhere, right? So programmatic exchanges are very similar to Wall Street, right? The stock exchange. So Wall Street is an exchange that brings together buyers and sellers of shares of stock. Programmatic exchanges brings together buyers and sellers of ad impressions. So when those became the dominant form of media buying instead of direct buys with the publishers, then that's when the fraud just proliferated. And that's because anybody could add their sites and apps into the exchange. Now, there was an early data point in 2016 when AppNexus got some PR for itself by publishing an article or providing data to Ad Exchanger. And they said they cleaned up their inventory from 260 billion impressions to 20 billion impressions. That's a 92% decrease, because even they could tell it was completely fraudulent. It was completely fake. So then when I asked Brian O'Kelly, okay, well, how many of the advertisers that paid for that crap got a 92% refund after you discovered that? He ghosted me and never talked to me again. So bottom line is, even back then, right, in the earliest days of programmatic, greater than 90% of the ad inventory was known to be fake. And it's just gotten worse from there, right? So in that case, that's what is ad fraud, and that's why it proliferated, right? It was enabled by programmatic exchanges. It was enabled by the advertisers no longer buying directly from the publishers. And then middlemen like the exchanges inserted themselves into that process so they could extract value. And that's when everything went south.
So it's really interesting because even though programmatic is quite automated, now we have AI speeding that up even more. And there's a lot of talk about agentic, which is automating it even further just to make it faster, which makes sense in theory. But one thing I'm curious to learn more about your perspective is how is AI changing the current ad fraud in 2026, and how is it looking like it's going to be projected for the future?
So here's kind of a contrarian answer to that. AI is not going to do anything to ad fraud. And do you know why? If you understand that ad fraud is already greater than 90%, then making it 92% is not that big a deal. Okay. The fraud is so rampant that, people think AI is going to, make the fraud more sophisticated, multiply, whatever. The fraud is already so rampant. AI is just incremental to that, right? So I can tell you from 2013, we could see the bad guys already falsifying the mouse movements on a page. And the bad guys were so bold, they would deliberately draw the satanic symbol with the mouse movement. They would just mock us openly because they knew we could see that, but they knew we couldn't do anything about it back in 2013, right? So they had all of this stuff that they can use to make the fraud more sophisticated. So a common misconception today is that, with AI, it can make the fraud look more human-like and whatever. Okay, you don't need AI to do that. They could automate, meaning they could move the mouse around on the page. And if they really needed those mouse movement patterns to look more sophisticated, they could simply copy a human's mouse movement patterns and just replay it. Okay, so you don't need AI for that. That's been done for 10 years, right? Nothing's new here. What I have seen more recently is where they're now using AI to generate fake recipe sites, right? So the AI can generate all the food photos, all the recipes. That way, they don't even need to send crawlers to other content sites and scrape that content or steal that content, right? 15 years ago, the way the bad guys created those fake WordPress sites was they would plagiarize the content from somewhere else, remix it lightly so it's not obvious plagiarism, and they would have plenty of content to put on their WordPress sites and make it look like a legitimate website, right? That was 15 years ago. Now they don't even need to send crawlers somewhere else to steal the content. They can just generate it with AI. That's really the only difference. And the AI can be coded so that you tell it, don't use any words like war or shooting or Iran or anything that would trigger brand safety blocks, right? So now that's why so many of the new fraud sites are recipe sites, because there's no brand safety keywords in there that would get them blocked. So I think the way to recap the answer is that AI is going to be incremental. It's not anything new if you really understood the levels of fraud that have been occurring already in the last 15 years. It's just that the advertisers and the verification vendors didn't see it. That's why they let it go through.
So when it comes to those recipe sites, would you say that's what a made for advertising site is, MFA? I've been seeing a lot of MFA comments on LinkedIn. So
MFA is yet another acronym from the industry trade bodies. They kind of sugarcoat it, right? So IVT, NHT, MFA. They come up with these 3-letter acronyms that basically disguise the problem. Call it bots, call it fraud. So then people will actually do something about it, right? IVT means invalid traffic. NHT means non-human traffic. MFA means made for advertising. But even that acronym is not that accurate. All websites that rely on advertising are made for advertising. Okay. What they're trying to say is that there are certain websites that don't have any human audiences. They were created out of thin air. Like some of the recent ones I can show you, there are sites that are 5 days old that are selling 10 million impressions. Okay. Wow. Anyone that just looked at that data could tell this is not a site I want to be buying on, because no humans would even know about that site that's 5 days old, let alone have 10 million impressions to sell. So it's 100% fraud. So yet those are still getting into the campaigns, and it's being missed by all the fraud detection companies. And even the ones that say, we just launched a new AI slop site detection thing. Okay, it's not working, just like their tech hasn't worked for the last 10 years. I mean, the verification vendors' tech. So all of the fraud just gets through. It gets covered up and sugar-coated because the legacy verification vendors can't catch any of the fraud. So they tell their advertisers, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Just keep spending.
Yeah, so I want to just zoom out a little, because I definitely know a lot of marketers that just don't understand it. Like, why would a bot click on my website, right? And so all these people that are setting up these made for advertising, quote unquote, websites, are
Hang
they
on.
the ones that are also creating the bots and just creating that cycle to generate the revenue? Looks like you froze, Dr. Fu.
Okay, sorry. The internet cut out. Okay, sorry. You were saying, why would a bot do something?
Yeah, so what I was saying is, are the bots the creation of the same people that are creating all these websites? They create the website, they create the bot, and then that kind of cycles through and builds the ad revenue.
Yeah, it's related, but let me let me separate the two things. So you've heard of DDoS attacks, right? Distributed denial of service attacks, where they can overwhelm a site with so much traffic that the site fails. Okay, that's a lot of traffic. That wasn't a lucrative use of those bots. But now, if you take that traffic fire hose and you point it at a website that carries ads, you can now generate tens of millions, if not tens of billions, of ad impressions. So the botnets already exist. Think of it as renting time on a botnet. So again, if you Google buy traffic for my website, there's plenty of these sellers that will offer you as much traffic as you want to buy. So all they're doing is you type in the web page or your website that you want the traffic to go to, and you say, okay, I want to buy 10 million page views. They're basically renting time on the botnet, and it'll just send instructions to the botnet that says, okay, we need 10 million page views over here. And the botnet will just faithfully execute that, right? So that's how you can get traffic on demand. And I always like to say, there's not a whole bunch of humans sitting around with nothing to do, but to go to your website in large quantities. Because if that were the case, good publishers would have survived, right? But that's not the case. So the good publishers that rely on human audiences, they haven't seen growth. In fact, they've seen decline in audiences because the audiences, the humans, can go get their news elsewhere, right? They don't even have to go to that website to get it anymore. Whereas the fake websites have shown hockey stick growth because they can just buy as much traffic as they want. Right? And so in those cases, the fraudsters can be teenagers, can be script kiddies. They can set up 10,000 websites, put some ad tech code on there and start running ads. Then you just sit back and wait for the money to hit their bank, right? That's how it happens. So they don't have to know how to make a botnet, right? Someone else already did. So it's simply an arbitrage opportunity where if they know they can sell the ads for $5 CPMs, cost per thousand, and they know that their cost of buying the traffic is $1 CPMs, right? Just for a simple math. It's $4 of pure profit, just sitting back doing nothing, right? So that's why so many people, it's so lucrative, so easy to do. That's why so many people get in on it. And because the dollars are so big now, organized crime and other countries are doing this because it's just free money. I have an article where I generated an image where it's a pot of gold sitting by the roadside with the top completely off, right? So you can just walk by and take it. Who in the right mind wouldn't walk by and just take the gold that's sitting there ready for you to take? That's exactly what's happening with digital advertising.
So sounds like,
oh, sorry, you go first.
Sounds like this is really hurting both publishers and advertisers. So with that said, who's benefiting the most from this current setup?
Everyone that's a middleman. Okay, so going back to the days before programmatic, when the advertiser was buying direct from the publisher, every dollar they spend would go to the publisher, and the publisher would make money for displaying the ads on their website, which had human audiences. The moment you inserted a middleman, right? So this is the ad exchange. They're now intermediating, right, between the advertiser and the seller, the publisher. Their job, because they're a venture-funded company, is to make as much revenue as possible for themselves and make as much profit as possible for themselves. So therefore, they're a toll taker. They're extracting money from that path between the advertiser and the publisher. About 10 years ago, there was a flurry of industry trade bodies that got into this question about supply chain efficiency, right? And WFA, ISBA, ANA, so these are all trade bodies of advertisers. They all ran studies, and all of them concluded that roughly 50% on average, somewhere between 40 to 60, but on average 50% of every dollar, 50 cents on every dollar, went to middlemen and not to the seller, the publisher. Okay, that was 10 years ago. The situation's only gotten worse because now you have more than one middleman, right? Multiple middlemen, sometimes undisclosed. Sometimes the agencies get involved because they needed a way to make money. So now for every dollar that the advertiser spends in ads, you're lucky if 1 cent of it got to the publisher because there's so many middlemen there extracting as much profit for themselves as possible. So that said, yes, it is hurting the advertiser because every dollar they spend in media did not go towards working media. It went to something else. It got ripped off, right? And for the publisher, they're getting 1 cent on the dollar. So imagine a future world where the advertiser would actually start buying direct from the publisher again. Now, that might sound impossible because the advertiser will say, well, how am I supposed to buy across hundreds of thousands of sites? I can't go negotiate advertising contracts with each of them. You don't need to, okay? In my digital advertising class, I asked my students, okay, name 10 websites you go to every day as fast as possible. Most of them can't get to 10, okay? They'll rattle off 5 or 6 or 7 and they'll start slowing down. They can't even get to 10 websites that they use every day. Now, they might use a recipe site once, right? Look up a recipe and then never go to it again. I don't mean those kind of sites. I mean sites that you use regularly, right? For me, it's like New York Times, CNN. I check a couple of those news sites every day. So those are ones that would be in my top 10. If you do the same thing with mobile apps, right? Can you name 10 mobile apps that you use every single day? Most of them can't get to 10, right? I have my standards, right? Gmail, maybe Google Maps, and a few others, but I can't get to 10. So if humans are using such a small number of apps all day long, what are the tens of millions of other apps, the hundreds of millions of other websites that nobody's ever heard of before, right? All of the traffic on those long tail sites are generated by bot activity or other fraudulent means, okay? And that's how you can get the hundreds of trillions of impressions, right? If you just think about the order of magnitude, it doesn't even make sense when there's only 7 or 8 billion total people on Earth, and not all of them have internet access. Okay, so there's not enough humans on Earth to generate that many ad impressions. However, if we relied on reality, like human audiences, none of these ad tech companies could have shown the hockey stick growth that their VCs required of them, right? Their venture capitalists required of them over the last 10 to 15 years. So yes, the people who are getting away with it are any company that's a middleman that relies on taking a toll or a cut. And the people that are hurt are the two endpoints, the advertisers on one side who are trying to show ads to people, and then the publishers on the other side that have the human audiences that they should be showing ads to.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of loop back to what marketers aren't getting about this. What do you see as like the kind of the big misconceptions in the marketing community, and how are marketers like essentially helping to perpetuate this?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. So for marketers, they think it's working because they're looking at metrics like click-through rates, number of visits to the website, all of those digital metrics. Those digital metrics are also easily falsified. And by that, I mean, humans don't click on ads that much, but bots do. Because when the bots click on the ads more, you think, wow, that's working really well. Let me allocate more dollars over here. And then you're allocating more money to the fake websites that use bot traffic, right? So to the advertisers, they think that those campaigns are working because they're looking at these quantity metrics or maybe vanity metrics like clicks and click-through rates as a gauge of the success of the campaign. They should be looking at outcomes, right? So you can get tons and tons of clicks. That doesn't mean you actually got any sales out the other end, right? So for years and years, they've been relying on these digital metrics to tell them how well the campaigns are working. And it's those exact metrics that are tricking them into thinking that it's working. Now, on top of that, the other problem that I keep coming back to is that the verification vendors that they relied on to protect their campaigns have been reporting 1% IVT or invalid traffic for the last 10 years straight. So if you trusted their numbers, right, you wouldn't think there's a problem, right? If the fraud is only 1%, yay, let's keep spending more. Let's increase the spend in digital. So because of the failures of the legacy fraud verification vendors to detect the basic fraud, they've reported 1%. And so they've essentially covered up the fraud that was there because they just didn't detect it. They didn't report it to their customers. If they actually detected it and told clients it's 30%, it's 50%, you got to be careful, then the advertisers would probably be more careful with their dollars. But because they've been told by these verification vendors that the fraud was 1%, and the industry trade associations even put those numbers into their press releases saying, yay, don't worry, fraud is solved. That's when they have a problem. So that's really the, like, multiple things have kind of kept the advertisers from understanding that fraud is a much bigger problem that they need to deal with, rather than just sweep it under the rug and continue increasing their spend.
Got it. Okay, so with all the movement in the industry, if you were a newly hired marketing manager or even a CMO, what are the first 2 or 3 things you would do right away to make sure you could at least try your best to eliminate as much ad fraud within your campaigns as much as possible?
Yeah, simple thing. Just don't assume, right? Don't assume the campaigns are clean. Don't assume that the fraud detection vendors are catching all the fraud and that the fraud is only 1%. Don't assume that the reports given to you by the platforms are accurate. I mean, it's not that they're committing fraud, it's just that they're not accurate. So you just shouldn't assume. So let me be very specific. So I was looking at some client reporting yesterday, and we said, okay, here's what we detected with my platform through analytics. And I said, can you pull a place report from the DSP that you're buying from to tell me which sites were actually where your ads actually went? And when they pulled that, there was literally zero overlap. None of the sites that were reported by the DSP, the platform they were buying from, corresponded to what I detected, like where the ads actually went. So in that case, if your only source of truth were the reports given to you by the platforms, you wouldn't know there was anything wrong with that. But here's the reason that the data was completely different. So in the bidding process, right? So every single ad impression is bid on at auction. There's something called the bid request. So the request is like, here's the ad opportunity, who wants to bid on me, right? In the bid request, you would typically have information about the user, the website, the web page, and things like that. But unfortunately, the bid request, everything in the bid request is declared, meaning you can say what you want. So if you have an opportunity to declare everything, that means it's easily falsifiable. And the bad guys would literally have to lie on everything, right? So if the contents of the bid request were simply declared, they would say it's supposed to go to this website. But then we detect where the ad actually went with a post-bid JavaScript tag, and we see that it went somewhere else. That's the difference, right? So the placement reports from the platform that you're buying from usually record the domain that was in the bid request, not the domain where the ad actually ended up, right? So in that particular case, as a case study, there was zero overlap between what we detected and what the placement reports told us, right? Literally none of the sites, even the quantities were not even correct. So imagine all those advertisers who are just relying on the placement reports given to them by the platforms that they're buying from. That's why I always say, like, for any marketer, young or old, never assume. Always try to have your way, your own way, independent way of measuring it, and see if the data comes out the same. If it corroborates, if it says yes, that's what we detected, then that's great. Keep doing what you're doing. But if it's completely different, or maybe like it's 10% different, 20% different, ask some questions like, how the heck is it 20% different from what you told me, right? So again, by having the right analytics in place, having your own data, then you have the independence, then you have the control, then you have the ability to actually make your digital marketing better and not just have to take someone else's word for it.
Yeah. And one last question for me, just to touch on Fou Analytics. So what really sets you apart from the other vendors in the space? And is it a black box as well? How transparent is Fou Analytics when it comes to all the reporting, all the data?
Yeah, so the way I'm going to talk about it is that transparency doesn't matter. Okay, transparency shouldn't matter. The difference is when you ask these legacy verification vendors, okay, how did you detect that? They won't tell you, right? Either because they don't know or they literally don't want to tell you, okay? The way I build Fou Analytics is that it's analytics, not just fraud detection. So every piece of detail that we collect, we show you in the dashboard. So you can actually understand why something was marked as bots or fraud, why something was marked as humans. So that's why I call it an analytics platform. All the data is there, so you can check it for yourself, right? That's kind of the opposite of black box. And that's also why transparency doesn't matter, because we are transparent, because we have all the data that you can inspect it yourself. It's not just some word you put in a press release saying, oh, I'm transparent. And what I found is like some of those players that are the least transparent are the ones saying they are the most transparent in their press releases. So it's like, if you see that in their press releases, run the other way.
I just want to thank everybody who joined us today. This was really a fascinating discussion, and I want to thank you too, Dr. Fu, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Luke. Good chatting with you and Sam.
All right. You take care, everyone.